Heather got away lightly there if you're not asking her questions, but grab her in the middle of the sessions or the breakout rooms as well. Look, here's the interesting thing for me. AI is not new. It's an 80-year-old overnight success story. The term was invented, believe it or not, in 1956. But the bit you're seeing at the moment is the rapid progress. Everybody got excited when ChatGPT came out in roughly November 22nd, 2022. But notice in 3 years where we've got to. Now you can point, click, drag, drop, get amazing things to happen at the speed that the business wants. But as Heather said, this isn't about the replacement of individuals. It's about the augmentation of you as talent. It isn't about removing responsible AI. It's about designing things in the way that we should, that make things accessible. And we should be doing accessibility by design now, as we've heard. But one of the things that is fundamental to anything that we do or anything that we deliver as software engineers is data, data, data. With us today, we've Brian Clelland, the principal data scientist for Congruity 360, who's going to talk about something called synthetic data, because data is something that can hold us back. So this is not real data, but real data. It allows us to deliver responsible AI. It allows us to develop applications at a sequence of pace. What you're going to see is a real-world case study where you look at the ethics, the responsible parts of it, the strategic parts, and everything else in between. Please, round of applause for Brian.
So, good morning, just about. My name is Brian Cleland. I'm Principal Data Scientist with Congruity 360. And today, I'll be speaking about synthetic data in the real world, specific use cases that we're working on in Congruity. So I'll begin by introducing the concept of the data wall, why it's been seen as a major issue in the AI sector. And we'll also look at how synthetic data might be a way of breaking through that data wall and continuing to allow AI to improve in future. We'll also consider the question of whether synthetic data might actually be a way of not just overcoming data scarcity, but potentially unlocking artificial superintelligence. And then we'll bring it back down to earth with a case study of how we use synthetic data within Congruity to improve our own data operations. And we'll finish up by looking at what the future landscape for synthetic data might look like. So firstly, I'd like to talk a little bit about this concept of the data wall, what it means. In simple terms, the idea is that we're at risk of running out of useful human-generated data to train AIs on. So this is a log-scale graph. So the black line at the top, what it shows is that human-generated data is actually still growing at an exponential rate. But the red line, which is the demand for data for cutting-edge foundation models, is growing at an even faster, even more steep curve. And the two lines are likely to meet at some point in the near future, in fact, in the next year or two. And what some people are concerned about is that this may represent some kind of hard barrier, a hard limit to the growth of AI. And in fact, there is some evidence that in recent years that there's a diminishing returns effect at work. So recent innovations in AI arguably are not showing the same dramatic improvements that they were a couple of years ago. So there's a lot of hyperbolic discussion around this idea. Some people claiming that it's going to be a hard limit. AI is not going to be the thing that we all thought it might be in future. But there's also serious commentators, people like Ilya Sutskever, who's one of the co-founders of OpenAI, and a man with a long track record of understanding and predicting where the AI sector was going to go. And Ilya said in December last year that in his opinion, we've achieved peak data and there will be no more. And that pre-training as we know it will unquestionably end. So it's clear that this is a serious issue and something we have to consider seriously. And it's not something that can be waved away simply. So if the question is, how do we overcome this potential data scarcity issue? One potential answer might be, can we use machine-generated data to replace human data? And I want to talk a little bit about the background of synthetic data and what that is. So synthetic data, the concept of synthetic data has been around for a long time. It's been around ever since people were working with data analytics So it came out from, originated from data scientists and machine learning engineers trying to develop models that used data that was in some way difficult to obtain or might have privacy issues attached to it or might have bias, might be expensive. So things like medical data, financial information, sometimes survey data. This kind of data can be very useful, but also it can be tricky to acquire or use for regulatory or other reasons. And what people have been doing for a long time is generating fake data that's designed to look like the actual real world data. And you can do this in different ways, but essentially it comes down to analyzing the data, statistically modeling the data, and then generating data that looks enough like the real world data that you can effectively train models on it. So this concept has been around a while, but it's received a lot of attention, increased levels of attention in the last year or so with this question of potential looming data scarcity. And it's particularly attracted a lot of attention from the big firms and big investors. And industry analysts like Gartner are suggesting that in the short term, the short to medium term, that synthetic data will actually completely overshadow the use of real world data for training cutting edge models. But I think it raises another interesting question as well, which is, might synthetic data not only potentially help with the data scarcity issue, but could it potentially unlock what some people might call artificial superintelligence? So go beyond the concept of edge AI into capabilities that exceed human capabilities. Now that might seem like a grandiose kind of a claim, and in a way it is, but I think there are some pointers to this being potential reality. So this example on the screen of DeepSeek, the DeepSeek model hit the news very recently, within the last couple of months, and it attracted a lot of mainstream media attention, largely because it had a huge impact on the stock market. It caused the largest single one-day fall in US stock market history, where NVIDIA stocks plunged almost $600 billion in one day. And as you can see from the Wall Street Journal headlines there was $1 trillion almost wiped out on the US stock market. Now, a lot of that has recovered, but it clearly was very significant impact beyond just the very niche, technical AI concerns. And there are a number of things about DeepSeek that I guess startled some industry observers. So firstly, it came from a Chinese lab, which probably shouldn't have surprised people because Chinese labs have been really good for a long time and they're getting better all the time. But more importantly, this model was released as open source. So effectively, the lab gave it away for free, which was very worrying for people who invested tens of billions of dollars in proprietary models. And the model itself was fantastically capable. It was very, very close in performance to the best of the best in the proprietary sector in the States. And even more worryingly for some, DeepSeek itself actually wasn't an AI company in the first place. It was a Chinese quant firm who decided to get into AI as a kind of a side quest and did this as a side project. So that created shockwaves. But why it's relevant to the talk today is because DeepSeek's innovations, the reason they were able to train a model in a short period of time for relatively low cost and give it away for nothing was because of synthetic data, and more specifically, the training methodologies that synthetic data enables. And particularly the concept they didn't invent, but they really showed the power of it, this idea of what they call test time scaling. And test time scaling essentially is where you train a model to think out loud, to generate tokens at inference time, and increase, by generating these tokens, to increase its problem-solving capabilities. And such was the impact and the importance of this innovation by DeepSeek that companies like NVIDIA, who shared this chart recently, see test time scaling as a way of continuing the exponential growth of AI as the traditional modes of pre-training and post-training start to become less important. So synthetic data has very rapidly become a hugely important thing in the AI world, with real significance for how the sector develops. But I want to look not just at the kind of the global context, but more specifically about the relevance of synthetic data to small and medium firms that a lot of us work in. Particularly, I want to look at a case study in Congruity 360, which is the company I work for. So essentially what Congruity does, just to give a little bit of background, is we help large, primarily US-based firms deal with huge quantities of unstructured data. So there are very significant costs associated with dealing with this unstructured data. There are massive compliance costs, there are business risks that have to be dealt with, and there are storage costs as well. So what we try to do is we try to bring some order to the chaos, and we have a product called Classifies 360, which enables us to do that. And the way it works is basically it scans your network, all your network attached storage. It looks at metadata, but it can also ingest files and look at the contents, and it helps companies understand what data is obsolete, what can be archived, what's redundant, what's trivial, what's risky or needs further investigation. So the problem a key problem that we in the data science team are focused on is the question of how we identify risky data. So what we understand as risky data is things like personal data, that's names, addresses, phone numbers, and so on. Financial data like IBAN, SWIFT codes, and credit card numbers, and also medical data, which can include things like diagnostics and drugs. And we have models that we've trained to identify these different risk types. And for some of these risk types, you can actually get quite substantial amounts of real-world data to train on, but some of them are very hard to acquire, as you might imagine. Things like credit card numbers and driving licenses, very hard to come across those for understandable reasons in public domain data. So we have to use synthetic data for that. And primarily we use an open source framework, a Python framework called Faker. Now Faker is quite a mature project at this stage. It's very capable. There's lots of modules built in, generators for different kinds of risky and non-risky synthetic data. So what we've done is we've built a wrapper around Faker to make it easier for us to use, essentially a front end that allows you to generate large batches of synthetic data that we can use to test and develop our models and so on. So when you're running a generation, you can choose the different file types that you want to include and the different proportions of those file types. You can define whether you want multi-sheet spreadsheets, different kinds of documents, emails, archives, and so on. You can also identify where you want the data to go, how much data you want to generate, what language it should be generated in, and we can also inject risky data in appropriate proportions as well. So that works really well. It's a fairly recent project for us, but what we're finding is the demand for this synthetic data extends beyond the data science team. It's actually something that's useful right across the board. So while we initially were focused on using this synthetic data to train risk models and evaluate risk models, we're finding it's useful for load testing the data ingestion pipelines that are a really important part of our platform. And we've engineers who are using it for that purpose. And the QA team are also starting to use synthetic data to help them better test the software, identify edge cases, and so on. Of course, there are challenges. Nothing in technology is ever completely straightforward. The system is a little bit slow at this point. We can generate about 1 gigabyte per hour. For our purposes, we really need to get it much faster. We're working on new custom generators for that purpose. Data diversity is always a challenge. So algorithmic generators tend to be quite rigid. You can use LLMs, but they tend to sample from the high frequency parts of the token distribution. So you can force them into the longer tail parts of the distribution, but there's some work to be done around that. And then the question of making sure that the data is realistic. So real world data has lots of quirks and strangeness going on. It's hard to predict. And we're looking at how we can use data augmentation techniques to make our own synthetic data more realistic. So the point I guess I'm trying to make is synthetic data is super important at the industry level, the cutting edge level, but it's also really important, I think, for anybody who's working with data on a daily basis. So I'd like to finish up by looking at what I think are the key trends, what the future landscape for synthetic data might look like. At the firm level, I think we're already seeing, obviously, these tools are improving all the time. They're going to get faster, they're going to get easier to use, and the data quality is going to continue to improve. I think we'll see more integration of AI-based generative approaches into it. So Faker is primarily an algorithmic framework, but you can include AI, and I think that integration is going to continue in future. And I think we'll see wider adoption of synthetic data among smaller firms to help them address their specific business cases and edge cases and so on. At the industry level, as Ilya has said, we're already seeing a reduction in focus on the importance of pre-training, and we're seeing the leading edge labs focusing more on new emerging techniques like reinforcement learning, test time scaling, and distillation, all of which are increasingly dependent on synthetic data. I think, and in fact, there's already evidence of increased use of things like digital twins and synthetic environments. So the idea is there that you create an environment that replicates a real-world environment and lets you generate fake data that is as close as possible to the real-world equivalent. And within those environments, we see increased usage of AI-enabled agents. So AIs that are acting like human beings to generate that kind of human logging data and interaction data that's essential to a lot of systems. And finally, I think it may be that the transition from human data to synthetic data maybe look back as a kind of an inflection point in the growth of AI, where we're seeing a shift from machines that are learning from humans but are limited to current human knowledge to AI that is able to develop complete new ways of understanding and operating in the world that we all live in today. Thanks very much. If anybody wants to have a chat about synthetic data or AI, I'll be around all day and be happy to discuss that with you.